Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are joining us from. Welcome to this third virtual festival of climate services and climate innovation organized by the Climate Europe 2 project. We are extremely happy to welcome you to this another edition of our community gathering. Those that know the project and have participated in the past events know that we have started in 2023 in September with the first Webstival, then March 2023 the second Webstival, and then we organized also in-person festival in March this year, and this is the third Webstival to which you are very welcome. Every Webstival is dedicated to a specific topic and specific theme. This time we are addressing the quality criteria, what makes a climate service a good service, and what kind of climate services are needed in order to foster transformational change across Europe and beyond. Can we go to the next slide, please? This Webstival will first start with this welcome session. This is where we set the stage and we will have a panel discussion listening to different experiences, what makes climate service a good climate service, as well as reports about the groundbreaking initiatives that contribute to making the climate services useful and used. Then later this afternoon, we will discuss the same criteria across different thematic areas. So we will look into good practices in the financial services that inform the financial protection and contribute to the filling the protection gap. We will look into municipal climate services and the method that they employ in order to deliver the message. And we will also delve into climate services for the health and related aspect in health. Then later, still this evening, there's a guest webinar that is organized together with the Mission Adaptation platform, and that webinar is broadcasted in a different platform, and you also need to register via different channel in order to participate in that. You will receive more information about that in a second. Tomorrow we will look into the more practical exercises. So we have invited several initiatives that will showcase how the climate services are built, and also take you through the climate services or the aspect that contribute to good climate services. So it will be a hands-on exercise engaging you in a more practical ways of interacting with climate services. Next slide, please. We have a certain rule of game. So you are muted at the beginning. You have noted that this Webstival is recorded, and for those that will not be able to participate in all session, you will be able to watch the recording afterwards. So therefore, we kindly ask you to keep your microphone muted and video camera closed when you are not speaking. This is very, very important for us. And we need to keep the time in order to deliver the rich program that we have prepared for you. That means without any further ado, I will introduce and hand over to my co-moderator, who is the Assun Sanclair, who is a climate change lead at DNV Group Research and Development, and also a leading researcher at the Earth Sciences Department of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And this is not a new person to you, because you have you might remember her from the previous editions of the Climate Europe Webstival and Festival. So with that, Assun, thank you very much, and I hand over the floor to you for the first expert panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaro, and welcome, colleagues. We are delighted to have you here, and I will need now to share my screen, and there we have. So we have various things this afternoon for you. The first thing we wanted to do was to share with you where we stand in Climate Europe 2 when we address the question, what defines a good climate service? And it's not easy. That's the first thing we want to share with you, because we need to be solving a very complicated puzzle, a puzzle that has multiple types of pieces that are large, small, that come from different aspects and come also from different communities. And that is the main reason why we do these Webstivals, to engage with all of you, to help us identify the pieces and then to help us put in those pieces together. But let me tell you the pieces that right now we are managing in the consortium of Climate Europe 2, and some of them might already be familiar to you through our work in previous years. So the first is that when we talk about standardizing climate service, exploring what is a good climate service, we need to ensure that we are looking at the full scope and the full value chain of climate services. We cannot stop by looking only at the climate data and the climate information. We need to be able to identify aspects related to the decision-making context to which the climate service is going to be applied. We need to be able to understand the scope and the large ecosystem or a small ecosystem of actors and the co-production processes involved. We need to be able to identify the different types of knowledge systems, whether those are technical, but also social, economical, different types and sources of data, and different types and sources of knowledge. And lastly, we need to be able to understand anything that is related to the delivery mode and to the evaluation of climate services. So this is our first big piece of this puzzle for seeking an answer to what is a good climate service. The second emerges from work in the consortium as well, which thorough combination of literature review and survey has identified a set of principles for high quality climate services. So we know, because the community has identified that they have to be science-based, user-focused, collaborative, transparent, timely and accessible, and also being able to be scalable. So we also have that set of principles, which of course are cross-cutting to all these different parts or aspects of the full value chain of climate services. However, and this is perhaps the core of what I wanted to share with you to start us all thinking through how to answer this question, we need to be thinking, what do we need in order to trust something? How do we know that something is good enough? And what does it take to do the convincing to others and to the community that that is the case? So there are two things that are critical here. So first of all, we need to establish a baseline, and this is where setting standards provides the baseline in order to be able to identify what is the way to trust something. And in order to do that, we need two things. We need two critical things. We need objective, agreed, accepted, measurable, and auditable criteria or requirements. And we also need the possibility to collect evidence that those requirements, that this criteria has been met in order to define a climate service for being good or not good. Now, I understand this is quite difficult perhaps to grasp. So what I want us to do is to spend just a few minutes, very little, doing together a thought exercise. And I don't need all of you to answer, just think about yourself, about the questions that I'm about to pose to you. So let's say that I'm trying to convince you that red is a beautiful color, or that you are trying to convince me about that. So what will you do in order to convince me that red is indeed a beautiful color? Take a second to think about that. You probably are thinking, well, but yes, it is a beautiful color, but maybe for some people it's not a beautiful color. Maybe it's a beautiful color for a dress, but not necessarily for a carpet or for a sofa, right? What is the issue with this question? The issue with this question is that it is very difficult to convince other people that red is a beautiful color because there is no established agreed criteria for red being a beautiful color. It is a subjective issue. It's a matter of taste, correct? So that's one key issue. The second is related to this question. Think about, how could you convince me that Elvis Presley, the singer, is still alive? What will you do if you were to convince me or to convince others about this question? Well, you might be thinking, clearly there is a very obvious set of criteria, and by obvious means criteria that we can all agree that defines whether a person is still or is still not alive, right? So we do, unlike the question about the red color, we do have the criteria, but what you probably won't have is the evidence. You will not be able to find the evidence that Elvis Presley is still alive. So criteria and evidence are fundamental pieces of our game. And let me sort of bring this together with my third question. How could you convince me that flying is safe? Many of us fly, some of us don't fly, some of us like flying, some of us still feel uncomfortable, right? But it is perfectly possible to convince somebody that flying is safe, even if they are afraid of it, because there is agreed, known, standardized structure, criteria, and requirements, and there is the possibility to collect evidence for it. So if you go, for example, this is what I will do if I wanted to convince somebody, I will take you to the Skybrary area, which is a website that collects all the many different types of standards and recommended practices within the aviation sector, touching upon all the different aspects of aviation, from the air-ground communication to the airworthiness of an aeroplane, to the flight terrain, to how to deal with a wildlife strike. Everything is totally codified. Everything is actually something for which you can find evidence. And in fact, when there is something goes wrong and there are accidents, there is serious analysis and testing and auditing that elaborates what went wrong and what were the causes of the breach in the safety in aviation. So that is the key, and this is what the consortium is trying to do. So just to finalize, let me very quickly tell you where we stand in regards to these four components with the cross-cutting principles in terms of the criteria, in terms of the requirements that we are analyzing throughout the consortium to see whether they are already standardized, whether they are standardizable, what is the maturity for them, etc. So for example, in terms of the decision context, we are looking into the adaptability and flexibility, the completeness. We are looking into how to establish the salience of a climate service. And for example, issues such as the market creation and innovation friendliness qualities of a particular climate service. When we look at the ecosystem of actors and co-production processes, we are looking into identifying how to really pinpoint completeness of the stakeholder mapping and the methodologies available to integrate all voices, how are methods for production being applied. We are also looking into the transparency or the scope of the service, so it is transparent to what aspects it's usable and which ones it's not. We are also looking into the qualities related to knowledge brokerage literacy and the diversity of the communication channels. And of course, some of these criteria might be applying to different of the components. So this is not a puzzle that all the pieces are always in the same place. Regarding knowledge systems, you could see here in this list that we are dealing with very different types of things. We are dealing with issues that are, excuse me, already even if not standardized, quite well codified, like the FAIR principles. We are also looking into issues related to data and processes for quality control and assurance, but we are also looking into something that is perhaps less quantitative, like the types of storylines and narrative approach that is being used, or the degree of completeness or the use and consideration of the multiple sources of knowledge that are needed. And lastly, for the delivery mode and evaluation, here again, we can go back to also the criteria of knowledge brokerage, literacy, and diversity of communication channels, in this case, applied to the delivery mode, but also questions related to the accessibility of the climate service, the visualization, characteristics and qualities, the timeliness, whether there is or there is not a system for accountability and feedback processes, the reflexiveness. We can even look at whether it is conducive to open science, given that an equitable community of climate services is so important. And lastly, we will need to identify the auditability and certifiability that applies to all these different type of criteria. So this is the puzzle that we are all after. And what we want to do is to discuss with all of you and to learn from your experiences the type of criteria, the type of requirements, and the challenges that are there in your work. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the panel that we are going to be starting and the presentations. We will hear first from Bladut Falcescu. Let me introduce my three speakers, and then I will give you the floor to come in. Bladut is from the National Meteorological Administration in Romania, and it's delightful that we want to start this Webstival, giving the floor to a PhD candidate that is really studying urban adaptation and climate policy with Meteo Romania, and will be sharing his work focused on adaptation processes, stakeholder engagement, and also on the question of the uptake of climate services. After Bladut, we have the pleasure to have our colleague Grit Martinez from Ecologic Institute in Berlin. Grit is actively engaged in Climate Europe too, in the science policy interface type of work, and with her training in both humanities and social sciences, Grit will give us a perspective more related to social processes and place-based context, and also the way in which cultural, ecological, political, economic, and institutional contexts are critically important to understand climate services. And lastly, we also have the pleasure to have with us Roberto Mezzalama from WSP, which is a large company with presence over 20 countries. And Roberto has quite a lot of many years of experience in the field of infrastructure development, but is specialized on sustainability, environmental impact, and risk assessment. So with this wonderful panel, I'm going to give the floor to the panelists for 7 minutes each, and then we'll get back to some questions, and then we would like to open the questions to the audience to hear also your views. So without further ado, Bladut, I would like to give the floor to you, and I will continue sharing my screen with your slides.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So yeah, in order to address the core of this session, so what defines a good climate service, I will base my perspective on a national study that we conducted, where we aimed to collect the needs and the perception of stakeholders, both users and potential users from Romania. This study was part of a larger project focused on enhancing administrative capacity for adaptation to climate change in Romania. So within the framework of this project, we need to map and to understand the Romanian context and the market of climate services, and implicitly how we could improve these services to better respond to the sectoral and the specific needs of the users. Next slide, please. Thank you. We started by examining the benefits of the climate services to better understand why they are, what the stakeholders, the users are using this climate services. So there is some the diversity in this regard, I could say. So most users rely on climate services for their day-to-day activities as they work is climate dependent, but also they use climate services for adapting to risk in the activity sector or other strategic decisions or other kind of benefits. And we also explored the frequency of services, of using services, and to gain a better understanding of the demand. And we observed difference between sectors. Of course, daily frequency was the most commonly indicated, except for sectors like forestry and biodiversity, and also occasionally on weekly frequency is indicated. Next slide, please. So to better map the needs of the potential users and the users, we explored the categories and formats of climate products that they are using, and they indicated a wide range of options. So they need long-term forecasts, climate monitoring, diagnostics, synthesis, and I'll not go into detail, but this is a good starting point for developing further more focused and more efficient climate services. Next slide, please. So another key aspect that we tackled was the technical characteristics of the data that we integrate into the climate services. So because this must meet the specific needs of users, whether in terms of special covers, spatial or temporal resolution or time frame. So we ask users to evaluate these factors on a scale from unimportant and to extremely important for their activities, as you can see in the two graphs in the below. So what I'd like to emphasize here is the diversity of the responses, and of course some sectoral patterns were identified. So this diversity of responses leads to the need for better collaboration and cooperation between the providers and the users. And the next slide, please. So to conclude, what we understand from what we understood from the study, so that stakeholders have a significant interest in using climate products and services to strengthen their ability to address climate related challenges. Yeah, and their interest in climate their interest in climate services is growing. These results are, as I said before, for Romania, where we have a climate services market in an early stage. So this is a good starting point. And also the co-development mechanisms are needed. But here I also think about the preliminary stages. I mean the informing stages, because in the study we encountered a lack of awareness and knowledge of the potential users, and this is an issue. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. Also, we identify sectoral patterns and particularities that need to be considered in the climate services development. And also, these services should provide tailored information that reflects relevant climatic conditions and hazards. So, focusing on the most relevant hazards that are impacting the activity of the actors, the potential users. And last but not least, the climate services should be easily translatable into actionable strategies using tools, decision support system, or any kind of instruments. But the climate services needs to be easier to understand and easily applicable in the real cases, in the specific cases of the users. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these introductory points, and we will get back later on in some of these key conclusions and insights that you are presenting. Thank you very much, Vadud. Grit, I would like to give the floor to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And good morning or good afternoon, colleagues, depending on where you are. Yes, I'm partnering in this project, so I will very briefly give you a short overview of our policy work in Climate Europe 2. As you can see on this slide, we have 4 agendas, and really the most important for us is to understand the knowledge systems of policymakers at a multi-level governance system, so at different levels, but we also pay a special attention to the role of local and regional knowledge and the needs and narratives, because as we all know, adaptation, services used take place at a very concrete place-based context. So we need to understand the local and regional needs and narratives. We especially look in this work package on governance tools for adaptation and mitigation through strategy plans and actions. On the next slide, the next slide, please. You can see the adaptation cycle. We are all familiar with it. It's often used. It's a single loop stepwise cycle, and it looks rather simple, but in practice it's not. And it's a theoretical framework. Policymakers at different stages of the cycle, they have very different goals, perceptions, knowledge, skills, and also the actual risk management process is much more complicated than this small and simple framework suggests. And through my work with the colleagues of the Innova project, and I'm happy to see some of you here, we had a chance to do different cases within the adaptation cycle. And we published together, so the slides or the pictures you are seeing here stems from some publication from which I heavily draw now also on the work we're doing here in Climate Europe 2. And we must stress with regard to the policymaker work that it's at very different stages in this cycle. We have to really acknowledge the local, the regional, and cross-regional circumstances. Then also climate services are still new to policymakers, especially decision makers at regional and local levels, and also standards may not be the first priority for them. So this is a hard piece of work to get to talk about standards, while climate services might be as a term not always understood or associated with only managers, but not with a wide area of stakeholders per se. And for sure, climate services must go beyond simply offering data and information. We need to integrate place-based knowledge and contextual narratives. This is very crucial to ensure that climate services for a decision maker in the policy context is relevant, it's credible, and it's trusted. On the next, on the final slide, you can see the so-called Valley of Death. We all know Bruno Latour, the French sociologist and philosopher. In 2018, he wrote a very famous book, Down to Earth, it's called, and he wrote, we need a new climate regime today, which brings us down to earth. And I think this is still very, very relevant quote. He, in fact, proposes to translate matters of fact into matters of concern to overcome the so-called Valley of Death. And in the context of a climate service perspective, the Valley of Death is the divide between climate science and decision makers. And it's very important to cross this divide, because the differences in knowledge and skills, but also in framing of climate risk and information needs, they really pose a serious gap between the suppliers and the users of the climate information. And in the context of this project and the policy work, we try to overcome the valley, the so-called valley of death, by paying attention to the really special context within policymakers try to adapt or to mitigate within the policy cycle. On the next and final slide, you see very preliminary recommendations from our work. I mean, we are halfway through the project, so it's a lot of work still to be done. But we really think looking on climate services and then on the standards for climate services, we need certain flexibility to those contextual issues and complexities. And we also need to situate climate services in a way that the term itself is not only linked to climate managers, administrators, or technicians, it's linked to all stakeholders active. And it calls for a large chunk of participation. And in a recent assessment report on half of the European cities, I think it was 327 European cities, there was acknowledged that adaptation plans improve. But it was acknowledged also that participation is still a long, long way to go. And we hope that the work we are doing will support those participation efforts. And interdisciplinary approaches, I think, are very important too, not only between the technical side of data, but also the social side of data, and establishing systemic feedbacks from the user perspective to the provider perspective, and likewise. And with that, I would like to give the floor back to our chairs and also look forward to engage in a nice discussion and productive discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grit, for these very important points. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because our next speaker, Roberto Mesalama, you will not be using slides. I don't know if our organizers want to put a back slide or I should do that. But in any case, Roberto, I really need to be able to see you. Please, you have a very different type of experience than our previous speakers and also much more operational. So the question that we wanted to pose to you is evidently related to sharing what is your experience in interacting with customers in a private market of climate services? What is the types of issues? What is the key criteria? What is what takes to really deliver to a customer a good climate service? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the question. Well, clearly, you know, to go back to great presentation, I'm sitting in the right-hand side of the valley of death. Okay, so I am among the people that are involved in taking decisions that are strongly influenced by climate, particularly in the past decade, I would say. I work mostly in infrastructure projects, and I'm dealing both with existing infrastructure and future infrastructure. So that already explains that there is a broad range of potential climate services that is related to the maintenance, to the, to the operational life, okay, if you want, of existing infrastructure, and also the future infrastructures. It's important to recognize the drivers in this world. The drivers are several. There are some regulatory drivers, particularly for new infrastructures, including environmental permitting, the EU taxonomy, the CSR directive. So there are drivers that are linked to regulations. Second, there are requirements from the financial institutions. Financial institutions are lending money, and they want to know where the money is going, and particularly if the money is coming back. So if the client will be able to repay, and clearly, you know, climate risks are very high in their agenda. And the third is that there is an increasing emergence of business continuity issues because of extreme events that are disrupting, you know, the functioning of infrastructures. Like, you know, you take trains, you take in these very hours in my country, in the Emilia-Romagna region, roads and services are going underwater, and so this is creating clearly a lot of tension in, you know, in the private sector. So these are the three main drivers that we see. And the other important driver is that often private companies have to take decisions here and now. So not for the distant future. This is a little bit different than the public sector. So they have to make financial, operational considerations, working in a very short time frame, even if they are dealing with problems that could materialize in the long term. And it's interesting. I had a few discussions, climate-related discussions with, board of directors or decision-making bodies at large and small companies, and those are difficult discussions to have because typically they are asking you, when you present something, they are asking you, "Are you sure?" Or at best, they are asking you, "What are the odds that this is going to happen?" So, and this is one of the gaps that we have to bridge. One of the problems of the valley that Grit was showing before, because for scientists, there's never enough data. Okay, we struggle also to decide the color of our socks. I'm exaggerating, but it's often the answer is, well, we need more data, and we don't have that luxury. So I think that one of the key things that we have to learn how to do is to manage uncertainty and discuss uncertainty with a broad range of decision makers. And in the private sector, they have quite strict requirements in that respect. The other point, and this has been already mentioned in a different form, but we had to manage quite a significant number of climate databases, data sets in the past few years. And so simply from the provision of climate data, and I know that climate data are only as a part of the picture, because we have to. Our job is to take data, transform them into information, and then these are transformed into decisions. So, but even at the beginning of this process, there are some shortcomings that I think should be addressed by the community that we represent here. So the first is accessing the data per se is already a challenge. And if you need to download a large data set from the likes of Copernicus, you have to pray all your gods that everything is going fine. The second is that the choice of indicators to represent a certain phenomenon, a certain climate hazard, is you have a choice, and there's no standardization there. And we can describe the same phenomenon, the same hazard with different indicators. I was surprised to learn that, for example, everybody's talking about heat waves, but there's no accepted universal definition for what a heat wave is. So we can use different definitions. That is an important problem, that need to be overcome, and that it turns towards standardization, and agreement around certain indicators. The other problem that we see is that sometimes you get data from a multimodal ensemble, and temperatures apart that are easy, but a lot of other indicators they are really all over the map. They're really all over the place, and so you end up being in a very difficult position, because if you just look at the numbers, if you just look at the graphs and the projection into the future, things could go either way, up, down, in circles, in cycles, and that's very difficult to address as an issue. Take, for example, the planning of wind farms. If you're in a very windy place, okay, that wind is going to be there. Okay, so it's not a big deal. But if you are in a marginal area and the projections are telling you that wind is going to decrease, or if they're telling you that it's going to increase, that could make the difference between a viable or a non-viable project. But nowadays, trying to take these decisions is complicated. The last point I want to make is that definitely there needs to be a stronger dialogue, much more meaningful dialogue between climate scientists and engineers, because like it or not, I'm not an engineer, but I work with engineers all the time. They are the ones that take decisions that have a strong influence on how things are done. And ultimately also how society responds to certain challenges. It's said that engineers save way more lives than doctors just by inventing sewage systems and water treatment systems. So I think that I think we have to get into the mindset of the engineering work and the design work, because that is driven by standards and codes. And actually, how can I say, the immobility of the standards and codes is considered one of the hindrances in the innovation, if you want, and also in addressing climate change issues. And they have to do that because they are bound in many countries legally to follow these standards and codes. So it's important that, you know, we make an effort to really understand how to crack that nut, how to you know, provide them with the information that they really need to run their models, to deal with uncertainty in the way they deal with uncertainty. That is ultimately to put some safety factor, you know, to take into account the problem. But sometimes the safety factor, if I look at too broad a range of outputs, can become unmanageable. You know, I've been in discussions with the designers of a metro line in a coastal African city that I will not mention. You know, and when we recommended the height of the defense wall they had to put, you know, towards the coast, they said no, that's not possible. Okay, so we have to be, you know, how can I say, inventive also in finding ways to, for example, move the equipment to a higher level, you know, so that we would create another safety buffer, if you want, with respect to potential sea storms. And so those are the, you know, first thing that come to mind, and that are basically keeping us busy, if you want. I can say there is a strong need for climate services in the private sector right now. There's a, you know, and there's also the need to educate the users of this data in the private sector, because sometimes they don't really understand what is the potential and also what are the limitations of you know, climate data, climate simulations, and the like.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for your insights. I would like Bladud and Ingrid to join us and open your camera. We are a little bit tight on time because we also want to do a Mentimeter. So before I actually put my and Roberto, please don't go. You are still in the panel. If you can put your camera back. I wanted to see, because I couldn't see, whether there is any questions from our audience to our speakers. I would like to prioritize that. And maybe, Yara, you can help me see if there is any key points in the chat.
There's an interesting discussion coming,
Yes.
but no question. So there's a separate discussion in the chat. I think you can go on with your question to the panelist.
Very good. Thank you, Yaro. I wanted to check that. So just a very quick question, follow-up question to you, Bladud. One of the things you recommend is that we need a lot more co-development mechanisms. What can you clarify a little bit more? So what would that be? What type of thing will that be, that a co-development mechanism? Very quickly, because we have a few minutes, just 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, yes, I started from the case of Romania, where, as I said before, the market of carbon services is not so good developed, so it is in an early stage. So, we don't still have the exercise, let's say, and I suggest the mechanisms to co-develop, because we don't use a strong cooperation and collaboration with the users and potential users. Usually, and I could say that from the perspective of the national service where I work, usually we receive some requests for information, products, and so on from the users, from the stakeholders, and we provide what they want, but we don't collaborate enough with them to create, and also they don't have they are not aware of the potential services that we can develop together. So this kind of mechanisms of procedures, if you want to work together to co-develop more efficient and more focused services for their specific needs would be strongly necessary.
Thank you very much. Great. Of course, you presented something that is super interesting and mentioned something that is really a huge issue with the valley of death. But I wanted to ask you, we have this ambition of an equitable climate services community, and we know that standardization is about generalizing. In your opinion, what do you think will be some of the key challenges that standardization poses for an equitable market?
Yeah, thank you for this most difficult question, which we are all aware since 2 years at least. If you go to a community context, for instance, and to the different phases of the adaptation cycle, then it's super clear that there is a lot of details to be taken into account. And if I'm thinking about a standard, this is not about a detail. A standard is in uptaking of, coming from a micro level to a macro level and have a, let's say, solution which fits to many situations. So the best thing, or the best way I can think about it, is to identify, let's say, across the European policy landscape and the urban planning landscapes, similar settings, to have a map of, let's say, similar situations which can occur, and then try to come up with a standard which helps in such a situation, in such a context. No doubt we have so many contextual situations, but as an ethnographer and anthropologist, I also know that things repeat. Even place-based contexts repeat. They might be called different, but bottom line, they are the same thing. So if we can try to come up with a kind of generalization of those different contexts, this might be very helpful in terms of standards. But I would also like to say that maybe there is not always a standard for a concrete situation, and we should also let it be okay, so to speak.
Right. Thank you. I think this is an important thing that Climate Europe 2 is after. Excellent. And just to finalize the panel, Roberto, you made very interesting points. I particularly agree very much with the importance of understanding how engineers think for any kind of climate service related to the risk of infrastructure with roots to the world. The mindset is indeed in the standards and in codes, which was my example of the aviation and so forth. But you also mentioned that it might be very important to have, I wasn't sure I understood you correctly. You mentioned indicators and the importance of agreeing on a set of indicators and agreeing on the definitions of those indicators. Please, 30 seconds, clarify a little bit more what you meant by that. You're muted, Roberto.
Well, if you look at, for example, the EU taxonomy, okay, the EU taxonomy is presenting a list of what they define climate hazards. That is the starting point, of any climate risk assessment. There are many ways to this. There are some of these hazards can be described in different ways, and if we do not have some consistency, we might end up with some companies or some infrastructure in some places defining things in one way and others defining things in another way. And this is confusing for people. It's confusing also for the, how can I say, for example, for the financial community that has to finance something, and you go to them with a risk assessment report, and they really cannot compare with any other. Okay, so I think that, the example I made, what is a heat wave? Okay, what is a cold spell? That in certain sectors like agriculture is very important to define, also for insurance reasons, for operational reasons, for availability of certain equipment reasons, and so on and so forth. So I think that there needs to be some effort in that space, okay, that is, again, turning the data into information that can be made actionable, okay, by somebody. That interface is still weak.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the three of you for your insights. And before I hand over the word back to Yarrow for the second part of this panel and our next speakers, I would like to actually engage all of you in our audience. And I'm going to share my screen because we have a Mentimeter quick poll, and my colleagues are going to put the link also in the chat. That is correct. Good. So what we have done is to make a simplified version. You have 4 questions in this Mentimeter, where we are asking you to tell us how important from 0 to 10, or is like a bar that you can move at your convenience, a series of the set of criteria that I presented earlier, to give us a sense of how on the dot we are doing right now. So we have, I believe, a total of 7 minutes for all of you. So please go to the Mentimeter and give us an answer to the questions there.
This has been a very interesting series of talks, as so now I take many notes. It has been very inspiring. So I'm looking forward to see the first anticipation of what the audience think about the quality criteria.
Right. I think they still had 40 more seconds in my clock, but I know I'm 1 minute late. But I guess our colleagues Ines and Paula will share their screen with the initial results, and hopefully we'll be able to run this poll also tomorrow. Again, in case you have not been able to answer everything now. All right, now we can see. Can you put it on presentation mode? Perfect. Thank you. So. We had 4 questions, and if you go to the next next slide, there we go. So, how relevant are these criteria in relation to the decision context? So, the vast majority of you believe that a good description of the context is very important. So is flexibility, fitness of the timescales, and scalability and transferability of the climate service to the market. Very good. Okay, excellent. So that means we are on the dot on this type of criteria requirements. Can we see the next question related to the co-production processes? So identification of the relevant stakeholders, excellent. Use of co-development methods, which we also heard from our speakers. And very important, transparent communication on the limitations of the climate service. Really, indeed, very good to see this is ranking quite high. Next will be the different knowledge systems. Here again, most of you think that all these different issues that the consortium is right now handling are all important. Very good. And lastly, the delivery mode and evaluation. Exactly. Okay, so I think this this is a very good way to test that that we are doing things. And now comes the important part, right? And we need to evaluate this. What is missing? Evaluation of the uncertainty, free and open access. Very good. Capacity development, excellent, and indicators. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, I am 2 minutes late, Yaro. Sorry about this, but I give the floor back to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Asun, and thank you very much to the previous panelist. I really believe that the discussion was really inspiring and very informative and very useful for our work on standardizing and wrapping up what is a good climate service. Then we have a second panel, and in the second panel, there is also the second question: what kind of climate services or enabling condition we need in order to promote the transformational change? And there we have 2 panelists, and the panelists are Thomas Kurtz, who is a senior advisor at the EIT Climate Cake, and within the Climate Cake, he is responsible for orchestrating the application of system innovation. And he's also coordinating the Pathways to Resilience project, which is a very important project of the mission adaptation. And our second speaker is Haze Gossen, who is the director and CEO of Climate Adaptation Services. And he has a long-term experience in designing climate services. He initiated the Dutch Climate Impact Atlas, a national spatial adaptation knowledge portal, and he's also co-leading the Reach Out project that is dealing with delivering climate services for the cities. And I would like to invite our panelists to unmute your microphone and your camera. And in a similar way like before, do we have, I don't see you, or do we? Yes, we have, now I see you. Thank you very much for joining us. In a similar way like the first panel, we have a few questions for you. And this is of course stemming from your work, excellent work. So I would start perhaps with Thomas. And Thomas, you have contributed hugely also to designing the EU mission on adaptation to climate change. And now you are coordinating the groundbreaking Path to Resilience project. So what is your take on in what form or way climate services might encourage transformational change? And in which way do you incorporate this potential in your project, Path to Resilience?
Thank you very much, Yarrow and Asin, for the invite to this panel. I'm really honored. As you introduced, I'm coordinating this Pathway to Resilience project, and I have been involved in the mission adaptation design. I'm by no means a climate service specialist, so I am a little bit dragged outside my comfort zone here to say something about this. So I thought I return that favor and try to do the same to the audience here. And thinking a little bit what makes a good climate service in the context of this sort of the ambition of the mission or Pathway to Resilience, which is really to go beyond the linear adaptation to really go to systemic transformations or transitions to climate resilience that really transform societies and systems. And so in that context, I think building on sort of the question, what makes a good service? I think a good climate service is a climate service that supports the actual transition to climate resilience or climate neutrality. And as such, I mean, maybe sort of having said that before, we understand climate service as one of the key underlying or underpinning enabling conditions to transitions. So it's next to governance or finances and resources and other things, knowledge and data or climate services as that part is one of the fundamental underpinning enabling conditions for transitions or transformation to happen. So in that sense, I think I would sort of not wanting to think that I am at the same level of Bruno Latour, but taking that a little bit further, the valley of death metaphor, sort of, I think we need to move not only from matter of fact to matters of concern, but actually to matters for hope. So I would like to see or challenge you to think that not only should climate services measure and visualize the changes of the climate that are coming towards us and sort of immediate responses to that, but also to really monitor and visualize the changes that we want to have coming about and that we need in order to actually become climate resilient or climate neutral. And so maybe that means then in 3 bits, sort of monitor and visualize the drivers of this positive change, and indicators of progress or outcome indicators, if you so want, of where we want to get and what we want to be. But not only that, but also model and visualize possible desirable futures to really help everybody, decision makers, but also the people as such, to envisage much better what could be possible futures and how they could look like. And to do that in as much as possible in an evidence-based way, or at least in a way that is sort of scientifically and otherwise robust, robustly dealing with the uncertainties, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be a second point, to really visualize this possible desirable futures. And then, I mean, I think what that means in terms of building an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem, is to really look beyond the usual suspects of what you may be used to do and what you used to work. And so, I mean, on the one hand, you would, again, and that's a little bit more standard to what you're used to, but in a different perspective, you need to look for data or in situ data much more to bring all this sort of more value-based and socioeconomic elements into the picture of, what are these positive drivers of change, of behavioral change, of policies, of et cetera, et cetera. The other part is, sort of then once you have thought about data, you think about data spaces, local digital twins and modulations of the whole bit. And in that context, I think it's important to think about how to leverage important elements of the digital transition. AI, for example, in terms of visualization or bringing data together or sort of bridging gaps of data where they aren't available. And then altogether, really to think about visualization of these possible futures in order to influence people, in a positive way, to influence them in starting to think about what makes the difference, what is important to us, how do we envision to live in a just climate transition. And then maybe think about different uses of climate services, like think into gamification. I mean, going beyond this being used only by the clerks of, sort of authorities or and advisories and stuff like that. Think about this being going out as games. So you reach the kids or the people that actually want to play with our future. So I leave it at that as to be sort of challenged again. So here we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I like this very much. I mean, we talk about vulnerabilities, risk, and negative impacts, and you bring into the play the positive future, the inspiration for the people, the aspiration that we might strive towards. So this is really nice, and I think it prepares the ground for Hasse. And Hasse, you from your long-standing experience and also from your work on the Reach Out project, so how can climate services accelerate this more systemic and potentially transformative adaptation? What is your take on this?
Yeah, thanks, Jarl. Me too. So, yeah, Connor, I'm happy to be here with you today. So, awesome. And yeah, to your question, and I'm going to echo what Thomas has just said a little bit. I think from looking at the climate services landscape, historically this is being geared primarily towards risk assessments, and our perspective is very much a perspective from, say, risk avoidance, and which is good and very important, but talking to cities in the Netherlands, but also in the Reach Out project, we've learned that there is now more of a demand for a more positive sort of view, and maybe not so much talk about risks that we want to prevent in the far future, but looking into, okay, what is the city we want to live in 15 years? How can we create a city that is safe, but that is also healthy? How can we combine adaptation with mitigation objectives, with biodiversity and so forth? So we have to package our message into a more broader, more positive communication. So it's very important as a community that we have to broaden our repertoire, and that we have to shift beyond risk assessments in maybe a technocratic approach to a more holistic approach. And if you allow me, I can share my screen and show you a here it is. A figure from our Reach Out project, because what we indeed are trying to do then is prepare a sort of with different types of climate services and tools to support cities in this endeavor. And what you see here is, well, the categorization of our tools according to 3 things. So we have analysis, ambition, and action. And we have a very simple framework. It's not as sophisticated as the pathways to resilience approach, where you have a logical sequence of steps. This is more like an all-you-can-eat menu, and users can pick whatever they like from our menu. But the idea is that you can move from analysis, doing risk assessments at the city level, that you can move to envisioning, trying to get this holistic perspective in there, these positive elements that I said before, but then also trying to support action. So what does it take to implement your vision? Well, this is a learning experience as well, but yeah, I believe that this modular, flexible setup is useful, and also because we see that cities are in different stages of adaptation. Planning, some are already well advanced, and they will go directly to the action steps. Other ones are really at the beginning, and they haven't got a risk assessment in place. So, but there's no one size fits all. But I think that's what we've learned from our project. This modular way of presenting our tools, I think, is very useful. Then another important thing is that we learned that it is very important to have our message across, and you can use visualization techniques, of course, keeping it simple and visually effective is really important. And in the project, we also delved into a little bit deeper, and we came up with climate stories and using storytelling techniques to bring more science to different audiences, even to school children. You see here on the right, our colleague from Milan City presenting some of the results, using a very simple and effective climate story, really tailored to the context of the city. If you're interested in this, there'll be an interactive session tomorrow for the past 10, so I'm advertising that's today. So if you want to learn more about that, then this would be a nice opportunity. I think I'm going to give it to you, Jan, otherwise I'll be talking for too long. Okay. Jaro?
Yeah.
I'll give it to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was thinking that you would like to continue also in your talk. So there was a little bit, from my side, your talk was a little bit disturbed, but it was understandable what you were saying. There was probably some technical issues. So if you could speak more closely to the microphone, your voice would come over more clearly. So if you got that, this is a climate story. This is in terms of what has presented. There will be a session tomorrow morning, specifically designed to how to create these climate stories that foster the climate transformation or help to building the visioning. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Elsa. That was really nice. Now, there is a lot of common ground in your talks, right? It seems that this approach of climate storylines and the analysis, the AAA approach that Hase presented, the ambition, analysis, and action draw on the enabling condition, and those enabling conditions are literacy, climate literacy, data spaces. They include exactly what Thomas mentioned. So there are certain. It seems to me that the framework for encouraging the regions and cities to enroll in more ambitious adaptation and mitigation pathways are similar. The AAA is a little bit simpler, but I know, Thomas, that you're working on a very comprehensive support activities for the regions, and you have also financial resources and are distributing that across the cities and the regions. So could you spend a little bit more about this and whether there will be some support also in looking into the enabling conditions? So when you are designing these transformative pathways, what is the role that you or the importance that you attach to the climate services and the climate innovation at the regional level? If you want, you might also think about the smart specialization, how you encourage the regions to go on that pathway.
That's a huge package of things to be addressed in the last not even 12 minutes, because I guess Hase and you want to talk again. No, but very briefly, I think it's indeed a very very interesting path this Pathway to Resilient project is now embarking on. We will start now as of October to work with the first 40 of the 100 regions that we will work with in the continuation of the 3 years of the project still. So, and we have for each of these regions an 18-month program where we support them to go through these different steps of what we have developed as what we call the regional resilience journey, which brings you all the way from where we are now to understand, you know, what is the ground and the baseline where we start off from, to build a shared vision, then to design sort of pathways towards a possible resilient future. And then Pathway to Resilience would then stop, but then in principle, the journey would continue into sort of implementation mode, experimentation, upscaling of good practices, and then really reaching a new normal in terms of a sort of a systemic state for the society. So that's in very brief terms, the journey. As I mentioned, underpinning to this, we really put a lot of emphasis to these enabling conditions, of which knowledge and data and so climate services, part of that, are a very important part. So in terms of what we offer in these capacity building training program to these regions is for each different step we support this, but we also support that in terms of the enabling conditions and sort of, you know, the context of actually the systems to be transformed, the key community systems as defined by the Commission. So and as part of that, there's 2 instances where we draw on different mechanisms, sort of bringing people together and discussing on how we support the regions directly. I also want to emphasize, I mean, we as Pathway to Resilience, we are a pretty nifty consortium, but we also don't know it all. So we need to really work with lots of partners and others as well. And one of those ideas also coming from the mission is that we will engage other projects under the mission as, you know, as a part of a portfolio of activities that is ongoing in supporting the regions that are embarking on this transformational change process. And I have seen Webstival, who's coordinator of the Valorada project, for example, part of the audience here. So we are wanting to work and will work together with Valorada as to bring in their knowledge of how to design and you know, best put together climate services for this ambition. That's their sort of raison d'être, their program, and work with them in the context, for example, of what we call deep dive sessions, which is twice a year. We have created a space for experts to come together in projects like that to really think of what is this latest state of the play of, you know, how to do this, how to support regions. This will take place in the greatest space created by the mission of bringing these people together. And then from there, we will bring this type of knowledge into what we call innovation practice groups, which is for the exchanges amongst regions, where we'll bring our 40 regions with any other region undertaking any work under the mission together, of exchanging best practices, challenges they have in actually implementing this. And so this is then going back to, there will be a specific innovation practice group, which will meet 2 times at least per year, discussing of how to deploy climate services in this transformational setting. So I hope that will bring a lot of user-oriented perspective to the table and help us to actually feed back to then the projects like Valorada and us and the larger community to think better about what do we need.
This is fantastic. Thank you very much, Thomas. And you know, I believe I speak on behalf of the whole Climate Europe 2 consortium, but also other projects that we are ready to help and contribute to those dialogues and help to interact with you. I think there's a lot of knowledge that we are collecting through this Climate Europe 2, including these dialogues, and we are creating spaces also for other projects to bring their content and their call, their engagement with our community. So whenever you feel we can contribute and help with something as the project consortium and community, please do let us know. I believe this is exactly the way why we are here. Thank you very much. And then Hase, can I check very quickly whether the microphone works a little bit better now? Could you try to...
Testing.
Yeah, it's much better. Yeah, it's better. See what I have noticed, and in your presentation, it's brilliant. It's very clear. It comes out that why we have number of analytical tools for climate services. We have no tools or no clear understanding. What does it take to help the communities and regions to develop the vision?
Yeah.
Right, and the transformative vision, and help them to build their goal and commitments, like Thomas called it, the positive change, right, driving them towards the inspirational aspect that might encourage them to work. So what kind of, how do you see that? Are there any criteria that we can look at and see whether the climate services can deliver, or how we can support the communities in the visioning?
Yeah. Well, there's a clear concern there. I fully agree, and with my colleagues in Richard, perfectly writing a paper flagging this issue. But we're a little bit concerned that if we keep following these risk-based approaches, we will end up with not making up the tech pictures. And you can see this happening in some cities. You do a trip assessment, Google flood assessment, or a heat assessment, and you try to come up with a solution for every isolated problem. You end up with a collection of loosely connected things. It's a technocratic approach. And so what we want is to have this more holistic perspective, zooming out, understanding the wider landscape of the city, understanding the soil system, the natural system, but also society. We're now working on mapping sort of vulnerability claims. And so the questions are widening, and as you said, now there's a lot of support there, and we need to step up and create better support for this vision and ambition. And there are some tools in our toolbox. There is a nice tool developed by Deltares where you can design adaptation strategies within your system and or within your city. And it includes the costs and the added value that will bring. But still, there's a lot to be gained there. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think, this discussion is very well connected to the discussion that we had with the first expert panel, where there was emphasis on the co-development and the localized and tailored discussion, teasing out the value, elaborating about how we can empower with solution. But I take it very much, as you mentioned, we should not end up having plenty solutions to plenty problems, because this doesn't sum up to a transformational change, right? It's basically we might remain siloed in that we are looking for solutions that are quite isolated rather than looking at the broader context. And the climate services, as Thomas said, that is incredibly important, like building the enabling conditions and building the literacy and the skills towards designing, understanding the change. So we need to pay also more attention to the positive change, inspirational, and connecting the different solutions. So we are on a good page. We still have 3 minutes, and I will need only 30 seconds to instruct our audience for the coffee break. So what I would like to ask you, because I don't see any question from the chat, can I ask you to wrap up what the discussion in this first panel, also referring to, if you want so, to the first panel, the first session, what is your take-home messages, or what would be the key type of messages that you would like to strengthen coming from the discussion in this session? So may I start with you, Thomas? So what would be the key take-home messages that we really need to take the treasure of?
I think that for me, what I really loved from the first session was also the outcome, and then the criteria testing what are good indicators. So that's that Mentimeter testing. That was fantastic. I really like what is then sort of there being put together. I also like that analogy, or this moving from method of fact to method of concern. I would then want to take it one further, but I mean that taking that into a more proactive, constructive mode. But and so what I then said, really thinking about the future, but doing this, I think it's very important that we do this in the context of these good criteria of what is a good climate service, so that we don't lose track of being robust, and is a very difficult thing to do that on less and less quantitative and more qualitative issues to discuss and think about. But I think it's really valuable. So I mean, finding, for me, the tank hub would be that would be super challenging but interesting to see. What are we looking at, and how can we support this with robust services and data being put towards? Because we do need, I mean, as I've emphasized, we do need visioning and all this, but we need it in an evidence-based and in a serious way, not in a non-serious way. Because if we just spook off and people just ask us, what stuff we have smoked, and that doesn't really help to actually get it done and to convince people that we are actually serious about different positive change.
Were you muted, Jaro?
Fantastic. And now over to you, Hasse. What would be your take-home messages, the key coming from this discussion?
One of the things, and I think it was Glenn that mentioned that we have to move away from this linear approach, moving from risk to solution. But one other thing I wanted to use this opportunity for is to emphasize the very interesting work that one of my colleagues has done on defining what constitutes success. So what makes a climate service a successful one? And he published a very interesting paper. The result of the Delphi study, it was a global Delphi study including 15 climate service providers from around the world. I was waiting, and I'm pretty sure that some of you here in the room participated in this Delphi study. And it resulted in 12 success criteria. So it's like the concerns that came out of this approach. Well, criteria. And interesting thing is that we are now using that to design climate services in local. So you can use it as an evaluation framework, but you can also use it to design climate services, to prioritize what are the important elements when you set up one. So yeah, I just wanted to raise your attention because I think this might be one of the things in to fit into the climate Europe too. Part of I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much, Hasse. In the meantime, I posted the link to the paper that Hasse was referring to. It's a very interesting paper, and I can assure you that we have already incorporated that in the work of Climate Europe 2. So this is all we had the time for in the opening session. Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you very much, Hasse. I will leave the audience with the noise metaphor that both the speakers agreed on and formulated, moving away from matter of facts and matter of concerns to matter of opportunities. And after the coffee break, we will be looking into what the opportunities are in the financial sector, in the health sector, and the municipal services. And there will be also some interesting initiative flagged out by the horizontal mission adaptation projects like Soteria, Naturance, and PISA, but also many others that are all ready to contribute to and answer the call that Thomas was launching, the call for help in assisting the regions in designing what is the vision and what are the innovation solutions. So thank you very much, everybody. There will be a coffee break for half an hour. Our colleagues have prepared some interesting programs during the coffee break. So if you would like to listen to that program, there will be some recording played out. So this is open to you. We will be back in the plenary session at 16 o'clock. And from there, we will go into parallel session, deep dive workshop on the topics that I mentioned. So we will explain how it works when you are back. So I'm looking forward to seeing you at 4 o'clock Central European Eastern Time, and take some time to relax and grab a cup of coffee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome back, or welcome for those who join us in the recent minutes. So the next part of our Webstival is going to be split into different breakout groups. That means in a moment you will see the breakout rooms will be opened. Exactly like you see on the slide, there will be the opportunity for you to choose the session. We have 3 sessions, but only 2 will start right now. There will be another one that starts in 16:45 or something. So this is very important. We didn't want to split the audience into too many breakout groups. So there will be active discussion going on only in 2 parallel breakout groups. And the first one is dedicated to bridging the financial gap that I will be moderating. The other one that will start right now will be building a health sheet that's also looking into climate services that support the application in the health sector. And at 16:45, there will be another session opening why the first session will close, and that will be dedicated to storytelling for municipal services. So we have interesting panel in each of the breakout groups. We look forward to you to join, the breakout group of your choice. I see many of you have already made that call. Just as a reminder, at 17:30, we will get all back to the plenary room here. And for those of you who have registered and would like to participate in the guest webinar organized by the European Commission and Mission Adaptation Platform dedicated to water resilience, then you will need to move to the other platform that is hosting this guest webinar. So unless there are any questions, I would kindly ask my colleagues to open the breakout rooms if they are not open yet. And then simply choosing the session that you would like to continue with, click on the button which is called Join That Session, and you will be automatically transferred to that deep dive session, deep dive workshop. So I'm going to join the Bridging the Financial Protection Gap, and I hope to see many of you there in a second. So until then, enjoy the discussion.
Usiamo invece la parte di